Today I'll be going over my handheld and gimbal rigs for the Pocket 4K, why I chose to do the things the way I have, and I'll show you footage of what each setup is capable of. And remember that even if you don't use this camera, a lot of these same things can still apply to any other camera that you use. I'll also link all the parts that I talk about down in the description box for both setups. The first thing that you need to do when building any kind of camera rig or buying cameras or equipment in general is to identify exactly what it is that you needed to do. Everyone will have different needs and different requirements to do whatever it is that they want to do. So when you're watching this video, keep in mind that I did what's best for me and how I use this camera. So hopefully my setup gives you some ideas on what to do or what not to do for your setup. With these setups, I needed them to be flexible and functional. Something that I can easily transition from handheld to gimbal use without sacrificing full functionality of the camera or any image quality. So for the Pocket 4K, the battery life is horrible, so I needed a power solution. I have to be able to manual focus since it doesn't have continuous autofocus, and I need to be able to manage the size and the weight of everything in a convenient package. So all these things are factors that contributed to what I put together. For the handheld rig, I wanted something that solved those issues while shooting handheld, but also allowed me to quickly attach it to a tripod or mount it on the gimbal. So this is what I came up with. So I have the camera in a full cage, which allows me to have flexibility when mounting options, and it protects the camera from damage. This also allows me to mount the camera on the gimbal without any kind of adapter. With the camera being so wide, you won't be able to mount it on a Ronin S without an adapter plate. So the cage solves that problem because I can mount the base plate off center. And being that the Ronin S uses a Manfrotto 501 style base plate, I can use it as a foundation for the handheld rig, so I won't have to change the plates when I'm switching between handheld and the gimbal. So that solves that problem. I remember the very first time shooting with the Pocket 4K, I was trying to make a YouTube video, and I originally figured that I'd just buy a bunch of batteries to power the camera and it'll be fine. But when I started to film, I could literally watch the battery percentage drain, and I went through 2 whole batteries before I even finished what I was trying to say. So at that point I knew I needed a real power solution. V-mount was the way I decided to go because I know it'll be future proof and it's really easy and simple to use. I can just slide it onto the power plate and I can power the entire setup with just one battery. And instead of watching the battery drain before my eyes, I can literally use the camera over a couple of days without even charging the battery. There are also V-mount batteries that are much larger than the one I have, so power is far from an issue now. Everything is attached to a rod mount, and I have a Manfrotto style base plate adapter attached to it, so I can slide the camera on and off of the rod mount with just a turn of a knob. Now I know a lot of you are saying, looking from the setup, I can't see the screen because you have this big stupid battery in the way. And yes, I was thinking the same way when I weighed my options for this setup, but after using the camera, I realized that I hardly ever needed to use the screen anyway if I'm shooting handheld. To see what I'm shooting, I use an external monitor so I can reposition the screen any way that I like. And as far as settings, I don't have to adjust the shutter speed since I can set the camera to a specific shutter angle regardless of my frame rate. The aperture is controlled on the lens or on the button on the camera. The ISO has a button. I have dedicated buttons for false color and focus peaking, and I have 2 record buttons on the camera. So the only time I ever need to use the actual screen is if I'm changing the mode I'm shooting in, which I can still do with no problem, and I probably only need to do this once at the beginning of the shoot. So having the battery this close to the screen is far less of a problem than I thought it would have been. I have a top handle on the camera that attaches to the NATO rails that's built into the camera cage, and attached to that is my monitor. When the camera is on the gimbal, I usually have no problem viewing the screen on the camera itself. But when shooting handheld, the screen usually isn't in a position that I can see it, so the monitor allows me to have a screen that I can adjust to different angles, which is why I just leave it attached to the top handle using a double ball joint. On the back of the monitor, I have a dummy battery that connects to the power plate so that it can be powered from the V-mount battery just like the camera itself. So far that covers the power solution, the mounting, and the viewing of the footage. The camera of course needs something to record to, and the options are a SD card, CFast card, and an external SSD. The files from this camera are large and need to be transferred quickly, so the SSD was the easy option for me because I can get a lot of space for the lowest price and transfer speeds are very fast. Unfortunately, that means that it has to be mounted externally, but the bracket that's available for the cage keeps the setup nice and clean. This also gives me the convenience of being able to edit the footage directly from the hard drive itself without having to transfer the footage at all. Originally, I chose the Panasonic 12 to 35mm f2.8 because I thought it would be the ideal lens for me since it's fast, covers a good focal range, and is stabilized. But the focus by wire system has been so annoying and inconvenient for the way that I use the camera, and I always turn off the image stabilization when I'm using the lens, so let me explain why I was wrong. A good example is the follow focus system that I'm using, which is the tilta nucleus nano. It's perfect for gimbal use and handheld use, and I have the focus motor mounted directly on the camera cage. Well, the focus wheel has hard stops on it, so it calibrates to the lens that you have, and you can pull focus with the wheel as if you was holding the lens in your hand. And the hard stops match the lens's hard stops, so when I reach the end of the focus wheel, I'm also at the end of the focus dial on the lens. Well, since the 12 to 35 is focused by wire, the focus wheel doesn't have any hard stops and it just spins and spins. The amount that the focus changes also depends on how fast you spin the wheel. So if you spin it fast, the focus moves a lot. You spin it slow and it barely moves. So there's no way you can repeat the same focus motion each time because any difference in the speed will affect how the focus changes. This is okay for photography, but for video, it can be very annoying. So being that I'd be all the way at the end of the focus wheel, the lens of course can still keep spinning. So that basically makes this whole system completely useless and makes pulling focus a bit more of a task than it has to be. That's the biggest issue with the lens, but stabilization was also not as handy as I imagined. With everything I have on this setup, it adds weight, but good weight. And weight is your friend when it comes to stability. So when you see somebody that's holding like a red camera with a cinema lens, a monitor, and a battery attached, that's a solid amount of weight, but that camera doesn't have any stabilization either. But obviously those shots come out with a very nice looking camera shake that's desirable when you're shooting handheld. A smaller camera will have a lot of jitters trying to hold it steady because it doesn't have the weight to cancel out those small movements. So by building this rig out this way, I solved my stabilization concern on accident. So now I know what you're saying. Well, if the camera is more stable from the weight, wouldn't the lens stabilization just make it even better? Well, here's the problem with that. If you're trying to hold the camera perfectly still as if you had it on a tripod, it would definitely help with that. But once you start actually doing movements, the stabilization is trying to correct them and you can actually notice it working and trying to smooth things out. So you get some unnatural adjustments going on because the lens is trying to counteract the natural movements that the camera is making. And it might not be obvious at first, but if you really pay attention, you can see it. And this has ruined many shots for me. So yes, when I lose this lens, I turn the image stabilization completely off. So that got me thinking, maybe I should have went with the Olympus 12 to 40mm f2.8 because it is not stabilized, but it has a much better focus wheel. And I didn't get it because I didn't think that the focus wheel would be an issue, and I thought that the image stabilization would come in a lot more handy. So if I had to go back and do it all over again, I would probably get that lens instead. The lenses that ended up being perfect were the Mikey Cine Prime lenses. They come in a range of focal lengths and they are all about the same size. They are all T2.2, very high quality build, no focus breathing, and the biggest thing for me was that it gives me the ability to accurately and reliably pull focus. I'll go over these lenses in a separate video, but to get high quality cine lenses at such a low price is pretty amazing, and the main reason why I didn't go with a speed booster setup on this camera is because of these lenses. In front of the lens, I have a tilta mini matte box. Sometimes a shot will look washed out and hazy because of the angle that the light may be hitting the lens, and a matte box helps solve that. It's not a major add-on, but there have been many times that I wish that I had a matte box on the camera because I had to spend more time color grading trying to make the footage look decent. And this matte box is very small and very light, so it works on the gimbal and in the handheld setup, but it presented two big problems for me. The matte box has two ways that you can mount it. You can screw on an adapter to the lens and clip it straight to that, or you can mount it on the rods. Well, if I attach it to the lens itself, the adapter has threads on the inside, but my polarpro variable ND filter isn't thick enough to reach those threads, and the moment variable ND filter is too big to even fit in the matte box. With the regular ND filter, it should work just fine, but I paid for this nice variable ND filter for the convenience, and of course I would like to use it. I also need to be able to use my Pro Mist filter too, so unless you're using a normal ND filter or you're using a slide-in filter, you're not going to be able to attach the matte box to the lens and use these filters. So cool, I'll just mount it to the rods. Well, this presented problem number 2. If you remember how I said that the camera being so wide means that it doesn't fit on the gimbal without an adapter, and how the cage allows me to mount the camera off-center to correct that? Well, because of that, it is also off-centered on the rods, which isn't an issue at all, but when I tried to mount the matte box, which should be centered, now it doesn't align with the lens. So I needed to find a way to mount the matte box and be able to use my variable ND filter, and I came up with the easy solution. If you get the DJI Ronin S focus rod mount, it attaches perfectly to the front of the camera cage and allows you to attach a rod that is centered with the camera and attach the matte box too. And it doesn't get in the way of anything else on or off the gimbal. So now I can use my matte box, easily remove it when necessary, and I can use my filters with no problem. So on to the gimbal setup, starting with the gimbal choice. Obviously I needed a gimbal that can hold the weight, and the Ronin S definitely does that without breaking a sweat. But I've used many other gimbals too that can also carry the weight. So why did I choose the Ronin S? Well, for one thing, the size and the build of the Ronin S is solid. This setup will have a good bit of weight to it no matter what gimbal I use, so I needed something that was pretty easy to hold on to, and the Ronin S matches the size of the setup. The Ronin S also has the most convenient battery options and power solutions for me. I can easily power the camera directly from the gimbal using a small power cable without having to put in a dummy battery in the camera. And the Ronin S battery is built into the grip, so if I ever did run out of juice, I can just slide another grip on quickly. That also allows me to charge the whole setup with just one cable instead of having to take out small batteries out of the handle and charge them separately like on many other gimbals. Add that to all the other features the Ronin S has, and this is almost the perfect foundation for me. The only thing that I wish it had were access locks to stop the camera from flopping around when it's not in use, but other than that, I don't really have any complaints. I have the focus wheel mounted on the side of the gimbal right where the DJI focus wheel would be, except that this one is easily removed in case I want to hand it off to somebody else to pull focus. And I can attach the Mars 400S, which is a wireless image transmitter that I talked about in a different video, to the gimbal so you can see what's going on while pulling focus without having to look at the screen that I'm looking at on the back of the camera. The reason I'm not using the Ronin S focus motor and wheel is because I wouldn't be able to use it for the handheld setup. It only works on this specific gimbal and it's also not wireless, so I lose the ability to do many things. I thought about different monitor options, but the Pocket 4K has a big enough screen on it that I'm okay with looking at it to frame my shots and to pull focus, and I can usually see the screen when it's on the gimbal. But if I do need an external monitor, I can still just mount it on the other side of the gimbal, or I can swap the position of the focus wheel and the monitor depending on what's going on. But most of the time the screen on the camera is just fine. You can also control the Ronin S with an Xbox or PlayStation controller too. So if the gimbal is mounted on a car or in a tricky spot, I can have wireless monitor set up to see the image, I can control the gimbal with a controller, and I can pull focus completely wirelessly. I did need to attach some counterweight to the other side of the gimbal to balance everything out, but that's very easy to do. It literally just clips on the side of the arm and you're done. So this setup does exactly what I needed to do, and to go back to handheld, all I have to do is disconnect the cables, slide the camera off the gimbal and onto the rod mounts, attach the top handle and the cables, and that's it. So once again, I will have all the parts to the setup down below, and hopefully this might inspire you with some ideas for your own setup, even if you're not using this camera. So be sure to subscribe, like, comment on this video, any questions and comments, and I will see you guys in the next one.